Hello everyone, this is Kat and welcome back to My Hero Academia Podfic. This will be the continuation of Swallow the Stars. This will be Part 7, Chapter 7, entitled An Abundance of Revelations. Deep breath, Aizawa says. He's sitting on one end of the sofa and Izuku's on the other end. They're facing each other, legs crossed. Izuku's trying his hardest to not spiral into a panic attack. Sorry. Izuku's teeth are ground together, jaw tight. He doesn't understand what his problem is. The last time he talked to MHA, it had been his idea to go through with it, and he'd been so confident that nothing bad would happen. And nothing bad has happened, so why is he having such a hard time with this right now? It's frustrating and infuriating, and it's making him feel like the failure of a human that the doctors always believed him to be. Aizawa reaches out, palm up, and Izuku grabs his hand immediately in a death grip. Don't apologize. Aizawa squeezes back, his eyes watching Izuku's face intently. Izuku, listen to me. Really listen. He pauses long enough that Izuku belatedly realizes he should say something. Tell me if you're listening. I'm listening. Good. Up until just a few days ago, you've never had a good interaction with your quirk, correct? Izuku nods, and his neck is just as stiff as his jaw. Aizawa squeezes his hand again, a solid presence that Izuku leans into as much as possible. Overcoming fear is not as easy as forcing yourself past it once and suddenly being good as new. It takes time and repetition. There are going to be backward steps. It's not linear. There's nothing wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with you thinking this is difficult. This is difficult. The words are unspoken, but Izuku's rapidly learning to read between the lines with Aizawa. Closing his eyes, Izuku takes a deep breath and holds it, then slowly lets it out through his nose. He can feel MHA along his spine, coiled between his vertebrae in a way that is bordering on uncomfortable. The static that accompanies MHA's power is dull but present in the back of his mind, and Izuku focuses on it for a moment, letting it wash over him like white noise. He's had this power in him for years now, and in all that time, it's only been used with the intention of destruction. But Izuku wants to help people, whether that's as a hero like Aizawa or just as a friendly face for someone who needs it. Izuku's done hurting people. He opens his eyes. Okay. Izuku lets go of Aizawa's hand and reaches for the edge of the bandage over his right palm. Do you remember what you're asking it? Aizawa's capture weapon is in his lap, his left hand settled on it for use at a moment's notice. Izuku just nods, already focused on the task in front of him. When the bandage slips off of his hand, the static in his head gets louder, and Izuku watches black turn to red as the coiled thing along his spine unwinds and shifts up, perching on his shoulder. Flashes of emotion, vague thoughts, images, a greeting. Hello. Izuku keeps his eyes open, but his gaze is unfocused. Takes a considerable amount of concentration to communicate with MHA and not immediately close up his hand into a fist purely on instinct. I have a few questions, if that's okay. The static surges, and the weight on his shoulder gets so heavy that Izuku's body physically tilts with it, but it doesn't hurt. It feels content. Pleased, like MHA is settling in for the conversation. Izuku looks at Aizawa, locking eyes to say he's fine, and then his gaze slides away again. Can you really not do anything if my palms are covered? Something akin to agreement passes through Izuku's understanding, so he continues. And does that mean that, when the marks go up my arms, you're using more power? There's a pushback against that specific phrase, and Izuku narrows his eyes as he tries to keep track of everything MHA is running past him. It takes a while, probably a couple of minutes, before he understands that yes, his theory's correct, but it's not MHA using the power, it's MHA's power. But Izuku is in control of it. When Izuku pushes for clarification, MHA comes back with a very clear image of a gun, and then a sword. Weapons. MHA is a weapon. Have you always been a weapon? There's a pause as MHA shifts within him, moving from his shoulder down to his ribcage, where it swirls lazily in the spaces between them, and Izuku feels a sensation like shaking a head. A very clear no, before he's flooded with emotions again, concepts that extend far beyond Izuku's knowledge and comprehension, but he somehow understands them anyway. MHA is old. This Izuku already knew, but the concept of a god, of a being so ancient and powerful that it used to be worshipped, floors him. It has lost some power since then, with civilizations rising and falling, and old shrines and temples being lost to disrepair. MHA doesn't consider itself a god anymore, just a being that exists in between concepts of reality. But you don't control your power. Izuku finds it incredibly hard to believe that something as strong and vast as Amahaki can't force its power and will over Izuku, can't wrench control from his hands and force him to do as it says. But Amahaki sends that same head-shaking feeling and slides its way up to the very first of Izuku's ribs on his left side. Something burns, and Izuku hisses in a breath, quickly holding up a hand to Aizawa to let him know that everything's fine for the moment. The longer Amahaki rests on that rib, the more it hurts. Izuku closes his eyes against it, and immediately his mind is flooded with black script carved into white bone. Blood splattering in his periphery of his memories as static fills his ears. He understands instinctively, despite being unable to read the script, that this is a contract between himself and Amahaki, a contract that he very much so does not remember agreeing to. The weight on his rib and the pain running through him recedes. Then Amahaki travels up to his throat instead, vaguely cool and almost pleasant. Izuku takes a deep breath and forces his body to relax, to process the revelation of the contract and the understanding that he has of it through Amahaki's translation. The god is bound to him, inside of his body and under his bidding. The clause for Amahaki's freedom hinges on Izuku's death. Under the contract, Amahaki's power is Izuku's, except in the case of an emergency, where Amahaki can force its power to protect Izuku. This is not a requirement for the god in order to fulfill, but Izuku knows it's already happened because Amahaki presents memories of the night of his escape from the facility, the pain during the tests, and the people who had chased him down the street. Izuku was scared, and Amahaki kept him safe. Why? He doesn't want to open his eyes, because he can feel tears brimming, and he doesn't want Aizawa to panic and stop the conversation. If I die, you get to go free. Why did you save me? Instead of a direct answer, Izuku is presented with his own memories, shuffled through like a deck of cards. His horror at learning that Amahaki was being dismembered, over and over, so that it could be shoved into the bodies of children, all for the curiosity of power-hungry villains. Him crying over gaining the mark on his right palm, because if the doctors had only chosen him first, then the other children could have lived. Him wanting to take in more pieces of Amahaki faster so that it didn't have to suffer anymore and could be whole again. Him accepting the god into his body, extending a certain amount of care despite his fear, because he knew what it was like to suffer at the hands of the doctors, and he didn't want Amahaki to go through the same. A deep well of affection that isn't his own bubbles up into Izuku's mind, and the silky, heavy presence of Amahaki moves to his chest and vibrates in a quiet imitation of a cat's purr. Somehow, Izuku's kindness had an effect on the god, and all Amahaki is doing is returning the favor. With that understanding comes a flash of the human lifespan, and Izuku actually laughs, wet and a little hiccupy, but no less happy and humorous. Human lives are short, and Amahaki doesn't mind sticking around to make sure that Izuku survives to the end of his. Izuku wipes his eyes with the back of his hand and makes sure to give Aizawa a thumbs up to let him know that he's still okay despite the sudden tears. He sits in silence with Amahaki for a moment, listening to the static and just feeling the pressure in his chest, but the effort of holding all that power is beginning to wear on him, and he can feel his body starting to show signs of fatigue already. He pushes forward. One last important question to ask. Does that mean that you have no control over your power at all? If I asked you to help me limit it, could you? The volume of the static increases as Amahaki seems to think through how to answer before it pushes a tentative response that feels like uncertainty and effort. It can try, but it's not sure if it'll work. An image of a natural spring, water bubbling out of the earth and overflowing, comes to Izuku's mind, and he understands that it's a symbol for Amahaki's power inside of Izuku, that it just flows wherever it's uncapped. But then a river shows up, narrowing and widening as it travels its course, and Izuku understands. He smiles. Thank you. I really appreciate it. He picks up the bandages and starts to wrap his wrist. I'll talk to you again later. When his palm is fully covered, all the energy leaves Izuku's body and he sags forward. Aizawa catches him immediately. And Izuku doesn't mind the contact because Aizawa's safe, and he doesn't have the strength to keep himself upright anyway. Okay. Izuku, are you all right? Aizawa sounds worried, like he's seconds away from pulling Izuku to his chest and checking his pulse. I'm okay, Izuku murmurs, shakily raising a hand to set on top of Aizawa's. That was just a lot. Holding it in is hard. He takes a deep breath, and it's shaky, so he takes another and another until they're steady. I'm okay, he repeats, and this time he means it. He lifts his head to give Aizawa a smile, taking in his guardian's pinched brow and worried expression. Can I have a moment before I explain it to you? He needs to breathe, needs to center himself in this new reality. Aizawa nods and carefully pushes at Izuku's shoulders until he's leaning back against the armrest of the sofa. I'll go make some tea, and you'll tell me when I get back. Okay. Izuku's eyes slip shut, and he wonders if he's going to fall asleep before Aizawa returns. He doesn't want to, though, so he forces his eyes open and stares at the door to the balcony. Currently covered up by the drawn blinds, he listens to Aizawa in the kitchen, filling up the kettle and then turning it on, taking the mugs from the cabinet and tea from the pantry, all of this sensory information that reminds Izuku that he's safe, that he's home, that he's not in the facility anymore. Never again. He's never going back there again. Izuku jumps up from the sofa and rushes to the door as soon as he hears the knocking. Aizawa's in his bedroom getting ready for patrol, his first patrol since bringing Izuku home a little over 2 weeks ago. He should have gone out sooner, in Izuku's opinion, but he's also secretly glad that he didn't. Being able to come home from UA and establish a routine with Aizawa and the cats had been exactly what Izuku needed, but it is Aizawa's job as a hero to go on patrols, and they can't avoid it forever. After undoing the series of locks, Izuku pulls open the door with a big grin. Hi, Hisashi. Hi, Auntie. Hey, little listener. Hisashi steps through first, hair up in a high ponytail to keep it off his neck. Even though it's late in the evening, the early June air is warm and a little heavy, humidity starting to cling again now that the sun isn't around to burn it off. He holds out his hand at the height of Izuku's head, a clear question in his eyes, and Izuku dutifully tips his head forward in permission. Hisashi's hand is immediately in Izuku's hair, ruffling it with a laugh as he passes by to take off his shoes. Green Bean! Izuku preens at the new nickname from his auntie, and he turns to her with his arms already open for a hug. She swoops in, holds him tight, kissing the side of his head as she rocks him from side to side so quickly that his feet threaten to leave the floor. Auntie! He squeals with laughter, patting her shoulder so that she lets him go. We just finished eating. You're going to make me sick. If she makes you throw up on her, that's her own fault, Hisashi teases, shoving at Auntie Kayama's arm, and she quickly smacks him back. Ow, rude, Nem, rude. Let me love my nephew, Auntie Kayama says, hands on her hips as she gives her best glare. Aizawa steps into view then, leaning against the corner of the wall with his arms loosely folded. This was a bad idea, he says with absolutely no inflection in his voice and the blankest face Izuku's ever seen. Both Hisashi and Auntie Kayama make insulted noises, put their hands on their chests. Izuku giggles at them, but Aizawa's not swayed. Ground rules. No roughhousing, no chasing the cats, no sweets. He directs a very pointed look at Hisashi at that last one. And Izuku's to be in bed before 11:30, understood? Sho, you're such a dad. Auntie Kayama laughs and moves past Aizawa into the apartment. We're not going to corrupt him. Besides, Sashi's his dad, too. Hisashi laughs as he follows her. Yeah, but unfortunately I agree with him. Just because it's a weekend doesn't mean that we have to teach him the wonders of late nights and insomnia. Sighing heavily, Aizawa ignores them and walks over to crouch in front of Izuku. You sure you're going to be all right, kid? Izuku nods, not even a little hesitant. I'm okay. Which is true, mostly. He's going to be home, with Hisashi and his auntie and the cats. He's going to have fun with them before it's time for bed. But Aizawa is going to be in the streets, in the dark, out of Izuku's reach, and that's... Izuku. Oh no, that's Aizawa's teacher voice. The I know you're not telling me something voice. Aizawa raises his hand and, when Izuku doesn't shy away, puts it on Izuku's shoulder. What's going on in that head of yours? It's silly. Izuku chews on his lip, turns his head away, watching as Auntie Kayama walks into the kitchen, her knee-length flowy cardigan trailing after her like a cloak. She's laughing with Hisashi, though the conversation's too low for Izuku to hear. With a sigh, Izuku brings his eyes back to Aizawa. You're a hero. An underground hero. I know that there are bad people out there, dangerous people. And I know it's your job to fight them and arrest them or whatever. To save civilians, but He reaches up to take Aizawa's hand off his shoulder, carefully turning it over in his grip so that he can trace the scar on his palm, the calluses over his fingers. I don't want you to get hurt. Aizawa doesn't say anything for a moment that feels like a year. Then he slowly, carefully pulls Izuku into a hug. Izuku hugs him back immediately, grabbing fistfuls of his shirt and holding on with a death grip. You're such a brave kid. Have I ever told you that? Aizawa asks him, voice low and quiet, but still perfectly clear in Izuku's ear. Izuku shakes his head, just a small motion to not upset the hug. You are. You're really brave, and your heart is 4 times bigger than most people's. He pulls back then with a kiss to Izuku's temple, purposely meets Izuku's gaze. I do get hurt sometimes. I might get hurt tonight, but I'll come home, Izuku, I promise. Tears well up in Izuku's eyes, as unwanted as they are stubbornly staying put. Okay, he sniffs and quickly brings his hand up to wipe his eyes. I believe you. Good. I won't be made a liar over this. Aizawa stands and gently ruffles Izuku's hair. Go keep Namuri away from the cat treats. She always gives them way too many. I'll see you in the morning, okay? Doing his best to be as brave as Aizawa thinks he is, Izuku nods and carefully but intently walks around Aizawa further into the apartment. He doesn't look over his shoulder when the door opens and then quietly closes. He doesn't, but it's a very near thing. He spends the next hour helping Hizashi make black sesame seed cookies. They're for tomorrow, but you can have one now if you don't tell Shota. And talking to his auntie about modern heroes and the direction heroics has turned in the last generation. I mean, Auntie Kayama says, her chin perched in her palm as she watches him measure out dough to bake. I guess I can see what you're saying. I suppose it's hard to quantify quirks when All Might's right there. Izuku nods. Yeah, don't get me wrong. I really like All Might, and his quirk is very powerful, but when you compare modern heroes to the heroes of just 2 generations ago, it's pretty hard not to notice that heroics has become more about the quirk and less about the hero, if that makes sense. Hizashi hums in quiet agreement. Shota had to fight for his spot in the heroics department, and he had significantly better control of his quirk and knowledge of how to use it than I did at the time, but I waltzed right into the hero course without issue. He patrols regularly, and I mostly pick up openings when other heroes shift around their routes, but yet I'm in the top 100 and Shota's not even on the board. Yeah, but he's underground, Izuku says, fully in his element talking about this. If there's one thing Izuku knows, inside and out, it's heroics. And Auntie is Twilight, so that's why she's so low, too. Auntie Kayama laughs. Green Bean. I think I'm so low because of my quirk. Most people find the combination of it and my image a little unnerving and awkward. A frown tugs at Izuku's mouth, soon enough pulling down his brows, too. That's stupid. You have a non-violent takedown quirk. No risk of property damage, insanely low risk of injury. Yeah, sure, the range isn't great since it's a gas and it spreads out indiscriminately, but you're stealthy, and it's not like heroes have to work alone. You could easily get a partner to be a distraction while you snuck up on a villain. You could also get some support gear to make what's the word? Gas cans? No. Cans that release gas. Whatever. The point is that you could pre-store your quirk and use support gear for range and accuracy like Poizuna from 3 generations ago. Hizashi nudges Izuku, effectively cutting off his stream of consciousness. Izuku blinks up at him. Oh, sorry. Was that too much? Nah. I just don't think Nem's ever heard you talk about quirks like that before. Hizashi tilts his head sideways, drawing Izuku's attention to his auntie. She's just staring at him, mouth hanging slightly open and breathing slowly. Have you always been able to do that? She asks, shaking her head a little until her expression returns to something more normal. Izuku nods slowly. Green Bean, that's amazing. That's what I said. Hizashi puts the empty batter bowl into the sink and washes off his hands. Izuku, clean up and then show her your notebooks. Notebooks? Auntie Kayama asks. Plural? Izuku nods and smiles, finally understanding that they're complimenting him and that they're not upset that he started analyzing out loud. Aizawa wanted me to transfer all of my analysis onto paper. I think it was a roundabout way of making me practice writing again since I was forbidden. Well, he shakes his head and cements a smile into place. He doesn't want to think about the facility right now. I wrote it all down. There are 10 notebooks so far. He's been writing in them non-stop for nearly 2 weeks now. You're in... He trails off for a moment, eyes tipping up subconsciously as he mentally goes through the layout of his shelves and the colors of each individual notebook. You're in 5. I'll go grab that one. Forgetting about rinsing off his hands, Izuku races into the room and snatches up the purple notebook, which he proudly presents to his auntie as soon as he's back in the kitchen. After a pointed look from Hizashi, Izuku makes his way over to the sink while Auntie Kayama starts flipping through pages. He helps Hizashi clean up the dishes too, carefully avoiding the racks where the cookies are cooling. Green Bean, you said you were just transcribing this, right? That was all in your head already? Auntie Kayama asks, looking up at him as he takes a seat beside her. Mm-hmm, Izuku nods. I wasn't allowed to write unsupervised and outside of lessons, so I just had to remember all of it. She whistles, low and impressed. Do you have a photographic memory? What's that? Izuku asked, even though context clues point to an obvious answer. Izashi takes a seat across from Auntie Kayama and answers for her. It's a long-term memory ability that lets a person recall an image or information that they learned with perfect or near-perfect clarity. Oh, then yes. I have a much easier time remembering things when I can see them as opposed to just hearing them. I tend to space out a little if information is being given to me through words alone. Izuku nods quickly in emphasis. Videos too, not just images. And book pages. Auntie Kayama reaches her hand across the table and squeezes Izashi's wrist. Zashi, we're raising a genius. Nezu was not allowed to get his hands on him. Can you imagine the chaos? Izashi winces. Yeah, good point. No thanks. Izuku doesn't understand what they mean. Nezu is so polite, and quite smart, really, and Izuku would love to be taught by him, outside of the pre-made lessons that he's already going through. It would really be so bad to have lessons on how to think and store information better. Nezu must have a photographic memory too, since he's so intelligent. But Izuku doesn't get time to argue his side, because Auntie Kayama turns to him with suddenly a very excited look in her eyes. We're going to have a conversation about support equipment, Green Bean. And that's very nearly the best thing that anyone has ever said to him, falling closely behind the more obvious contenders, such as Aizawa telling Izuku that he wanted him to stay, or Aizawa and Hisashi promising him that he can be a hero if he wants. They spend another 2 hours talking about support items and quirks, how the two can work together in complements, but how it's important to have tools that can round out a hero's arsenal as well. It's fun, to put it plainly. Izuku has fun. It's also, unfortunately, exhausting. Before too long, Izuku's nodding off, head slumping forward almost into the table before Hisashi catches him and pulls him up. Let's get you to bed, Izuku, he murmurs, scooping Izuku into his arms and carrying him to his room. Izuku doesn't even change into pajamas. He just crawls under the covers in sweatpants and a t-shirt that he'd been wearing all day, and the moment he has his head hitting the pillow, he's unconscious. Some unmeasurable amount of time later, Izuku finds himself coming half awake to the feeling of a hand in his hair and a gentle kiss to his forehead. It has to be late, or insanely early. Feels like he slept for ages, but also feels like it's only been a few minutes. But Izashi had brought him to bed, and his auntie had said goodnight from the doorway, so there's really only one other person this could be. Sawa? He tries to say the whole name, but the first part catches in his throat. Hey, kid. Go back to sleep. I just wanted to say goodnight. Izuku hums, nuzzling against his pillow. Today's my birthday, he mumbles, a small smile spreading across his mouth. It's my birthday. Well, yesterday, most likely, since there's no way it's not past midnight yet if Aizawa is back from his patrol. Still, Aizawa presses another kiss to Izuku's forehead, and Izuku can feel the smile that curves against his skin. Okay. Happy birthday, Izuku. Sleep well. Proudly 13 years old now, Izuku falls into a sleep without nightmares, his first since coming home. Before Shota realizes it, it's over a month that has passed, and Izuku is a permanent resident in his life. He stops on his way to class, frozen in the hallway as the knowledge washes over him. More than a month. Izuku has a bedroom, does homework, helps with meal preparation. He can't cook, they've discovered, but he can cut vegetables and wash rice, so meals have become a joint effort. Texts Hisashi, memes at all hours of the night, and does his share of chores without having to be asked. Hell, he even picked out a birthday already. In the morning following, after a very, very long sleep, Izuku said it was the happiest day he's ever had, and that he wants to remember it as such forever. Arguably adorable. Aizawa had wanted to hug him forever after that. Jobs and other life necessities be damned. Somewhere along the line, Izuku had become a person in Shota's life whose absence would be noted, and whose presence would be missed if he wasn't there. Which is horrifying, but it does also lend validity to his assumption that he's been doing at least okay of a job of raising Izuku. A tug on his sleeve brings him back to reality. Aizawa, are you all right? Izuku's eyes are big and full of concern. If there's one thing the kid isn't good at, it's hiding his emotions. He wears his heart on his sleeve for everyone to see. Yeah, he says, and it's not a lie. It's weird and strange to think he's become a father figure to Izuku, but it's not like it's entirely unexpected. He insisted on raising Izuku himself. This was bound to happen eventually. Sorry for worrying you. Taking his hand back, he ruffles Izuku's hair. It's shorter now, after Izuku finally expresses dislike of having his hair hanging around his neck, and resumes walking toward the classroom. He throws open the door to 2A, and what remains of his homeroom from last year sits up at attention immediately. There aren't many students left after he'd expelled those who couldn't take the course seriously enough to survive, but those that remain are hard-working and diligent and More than most of his old students, incredibly kind. "Who remembers what we're doing today?" Shota asked, eyes sweeping over the room as Izuku closes the door and walks over to his desk. The students are used to him by now, and only a few eyes track him as he crosses the room in front of the chalkboard and settles in. Hokama raises her hand, and Shota gestures for her to speak. "Splitting into groups and reviewing cases where villains escaped capture more than twice." As she talks, Shota approaches the chalkboard and starts writing down the groups of students he had come up with the night before. It seems random, but it's not. He'd enlisted Izuku's help with the project as well. They're clustered based on their quirks, specifically quirks that don't work well together, for whatever reason that might be. He'd taken nothing else into account, and if they figure that out before the end of class, mentioning it either out loud or in their assignment, they'll get credit for it. They will also, even though he's not telling them about it, get a deduction if they can't figure it out. They're second years. They should be familiar with each other's quirks by now. "Good," he says when he's done, setting the chalk down and pulling out a folder from his bag. He sets a stack of papers on Noguchi's desk. "Take one and pass it around. Your assignment is to come up with a reason why the villains were able to escape capture and to back that reason up with the knowledge of what you've accumulated while at UA. If you're unable to come up with a reason as a group, or if you were unable to use your knowledge of heroics to explain it, you fail, understood?" A chorus of "Yes, Sensei" echoes throughout the room. "Split up, then. You only have the hour." Chairs and desks immediately scrape against the floor as the students swap seats and put their heads together in their groups. Satisfied that they'll be distracted for the next hour, Shota turns his attention to Izuku. The kid is currently writing in a notebook, the 16th that he's bought, if memory serves, and when Shota peers at it, he recognizes the quirk he's describing. "Working on All Might again?" "He's gotten weaker and slower since the last time I analyzed him a few years ago," Izuku says quietly, though he doesn't pause his writing. "Something happened. Probably an injury, but I haven't been able to find a fight where he'd been injured enough to explain it." Has he gotten weaker? Shota hadn't noticed, but he also doesn't spend any time, watching news clips of the #1 hero or interacting with him, but he believes what Izuku says because he knows just how sharp the kid's mind is and how much detail he's able to take into account, especially now that he's able to write his thoughts down instead of holding it all in his head. Although, if Nomori's actually right about Izuku having a photographic memory, then it doesn't matter whether that information is stored in a notebook or in his mind, but it's much easier for Shota if that information that Izuku's talking about is written down concisely. "Maybe he's just old," Shota says, not doubting Izuku but offering an explanation. "He is getting up there in years, 40s or 50s, I think." Izuku hums, thoughtful, and writes "old age" down on the paper. Then he closes the notebook, and he looks up expectantly at Shota. It strikes Shota again how much they've fallen into routine and started to understand each other. Shota doesn't have to tell Izuku it's time to stop analyzing quirks and start focusing on school. He just has to wait a few moments for Izuku to finish his thought before he has the kid's undivided attention. And likewise, Izuku doesn't have to ask Shota to give him that necessary moment to finish writing, because he knows Shota will be patient with him. When they're at home, Izuku's relaxed and a fairly normal, if extremely traumatized and recovering child. Hizashi had told Shota that Izuku had calmed down in crowds already and really likes making wishes in the fountain at the mall. They visited a couple of times since the initial outing, always on the hunt for items to fill Izuku's room with. He likes to sit in the living room and watch the television, usually the hero news, but still likes to read comic books and play with the cats, with far more energy than Shota had ever been able to. But as soon as it's time to learn, Izuku's completely serious. He's so hungry for knowledge that it's almost concerning, only because it's a reminder that this is something he was denied for so long. But Shota isn't going to be the one to keep him from learning. He pulls a book from his bag and sets it down on Izuku's desk. "Hero laws?" "Yeah, not exactly middle school learning material. Usually this isn't even covered until UA's second year, before the students take their provisional license exam, but he wants Izuku to have an understanding of what is and isn't allowed for quirk usage with professional heroes. Not because he's going to force the kid to go down that path, but because even after a month of slowly integrating quirk training into their schedule, Izuku is still unsure about how much is too much when he thinks about using his quirk. "Just for this class," Shota says. He taps the cover with his finger. "You have the hour to read it. You can mark up the book if you need to. It's my own personal copy. Take notes if you want. There isn't going to be a quiz, though we are going to review this tonight as normal." Izuku nods his understanding and cracks open the book. It's not dense, nor is it very long, but it is an extremely dry read, since it's literally just every law that heroes are expected to uphold while working, including limitations on their quirks, depending on the situation. He leaves it to Izuku, and fully expects him to finish the book at least once before class is over. With all of his students working, Shota pulls his compressed sleeping bag out, and folds himself inside of it for a quick nap, bent over the table at the front of the room. It feels like no time at all has passed before there's a knock on the table, waking him up from his half-asleep state. "Sensei, class is over?" Shota raises his eyes to see Hokama standing in front of him. Her hands are folded over her stomach. Behind her, Ohara, Teramoto, and Marinaka are standing in similar poses. "Okay," he says slowly, not bothering to sit up yet. "Put your assignment down and leave, then." "We already handed it in." She points to a stack of papers at the corner of the table. "We were just wondering if we could take Izuku-kun to lunch with us." "Oh, this is new." Shota sits up and unzips his sleeping bag so that it falls off of his shoulders. These are students that he trusts, that he's watched go off and return from their internships, who excelled at the sports festival 2 years in a row, who are strong learners with hearts of gold. If he's going to trust Izuku with a bunch of kids, it's going to be these 4, and maybe a select few of the third years. With that in mind, he turns to look at Izuku, who still has his head bent down, focused on reading. How many times has he read that book in the last hour? "Izuku," he calls, and immediately the kid's head shoots up, looking at Shota with embarrassment, flushing his cheeks. "Do you want to go to lunch with these 4? Lunch Rush knows who you are, so you don't have to worry about paying." He'll get hounded for that later, or it'll come out of his paycheck at the end of the month. The second option is more likely, knowing Nezu. Oh. Izuku's eyes go wide as he takes in the 4 students who stayed behind after the bell, who clearly want to include him. Shota can only imagine what's going through Izuku's head, but he won't lie and say he's not pleased when Izuku nods and stands up. "Sure. Please take care of me," he says with a short bow. "None of that," Ohara says, stepping forward and offering her hand. "Just call us senpai, and we'll consider that as all the formality we need." Izuku blushes, if possible even more. "Okay, Ohara-senpai." After a moment of hesitation, Izuku takes the offered hand, and even though he immediately looks at Shota as if to ask if this is really all right, that's a hell of a lot of progress for him to be showing in just over a month. "Go on, then. I'll take your stuff to the teacher's lounge. Make sure you grab it before you go see Nezu after lunch." Shota has rescue training with some of the first years that he has to oversee this afternoon, something that he's not looking forward to, and something that Izuku can definitely not sit in on. "And you 4, he addresses the second years, who all look at him with reassuring smiles as if they've already guessed what he's going to say. "Don't let him out of your sight, got it?" Izuku may be getting better with crowds, but that doesn't mean his panic attacks have stopped completely. Shota would rather not risk it. "We'll take good care of him," Ohara promises before turning to Izuku. "Do you want to ride on my shoulders?" "Can I?" It's like the kid had been offered an early Christmas, although he probably doesn't even know what Christmas is. He never even had a birthday, for God's sake. Ohara laughs and picks him up with ease. Izuku's not light despite his size, but Ohara is the second strongest student in her year, and it doesn't faze her. She laughs, though, when he settles onto her shoulders. "What on earth is Aizawa-sensei feeding you? Careful with the horns, Izuku-kun." Blushing and trying to stammer out an answer, Izuku ends up just covering his face with his hands. Like that, he's carried out of the room by Ohara and flanked on all sides by the others. Suddenly alone, Shota leans back in the chair with a sigh, stares up at the ceiling for a moment. Over a month. It's barely into July. Izuku's gained weight and confidence and color to his skin. He doesn't remind Shota of a skeleton when he falls asleep on the couch, or a ghost when Shota catches sight of him first thing in the morning. And his hands no longer cramp when he's been writing for a while. And Shota has started cooking again, every meal, which he hasn't done in years. But he's not going to make Izuku live off of the no-effort protein jelly pouches that Shota had been religiously eating out of sheer laziness, and if he's already cooking for Izuku, then it wouldn't be logical for him to eat anything else, which means that Shota's also gained a little weight and a little more muscle since Izuku had joined his household, his family. All this change in a month, and already Shota can't imagine going back to the way things were before. Izuku's part of his life now, not just an insertion into a system that worked just fine. He's a new cog, changing the way the gears run, and it's better. The only other person to ever do that in Shota's life is Hizashi, but even he didn't change anything this fast, and he was helped along by the grease that was Oboro. "What the fuck?" Shota mutters, scrubbing a hand down his face before forcing himself to get up. He folds and compresses his sleeping bag, gathers up the assignments, and leaves the room. All right, everyone. This concludes Chapter 7 of Swallow the Stars. Chapter 8 will be next. I hope you all are still enjoying this one, and as always, thank you so much for listening.